Afternoon, everyone. What a beautiful day, for one thing. So nice out there, and I'm glad we're able to have this conversation today. Let's see. I'm Sandy Clark. I'm the Vice President for News and Civic Dialogue at WHYY. Um, hmm, I am. Uh, let's see. Maybe it's not so much optimistic. My feeling is if we don't get our act together in this moment, there's no hope, right? This has been a diversity, inclusion, and we barely get to equity. So let's just, I think it's a moment where that is no longer the fringe of a conversation. It's not talking about, the need for diversity, inclusion, and equity on the outside of as an initiative, right? I mean, this is stuff that should really be embedded in what we do in a really a value and a principle of journalism. And so I think it's going to take really good leadership. It's going to take cross-generational leadership so that we can also get the best of the talent that is up and coming, as well as our veteran talent. So I don't know. I have seen some good signs. There's certainly an attention to the issue that has been around forever, right? And has been largely optional in way too many newsrooms for a really long time. So I'm actually not going to decide. I'm going to say that I'm optimistic for some of the work that I'm seeing, and yet I think this is a moment that is really a make or break moment. Hey, Steve.
Interesting. Yeah, I agree with Sandy on most of that. I'm Steve Waldman. I'm the co-founder and president of Report for America. And it feels to me and us like you used to have a situation where news organizations had money but no interest in being diverse. Now they have interest in being diverse but have no money. And so at the very moment when they might be inclined to diversify, they're getting crushed and contracting and have fewer jobs. And so it creates challenges. But on balance, I would say I'm more optimistic. And I'll tell you like a little bit of a story on that where, our model for Report for America is we recruit all these talented reporters, and then we give newsrooms a slate of candidates, 3 to 6 candidates. And they make the final decisions. They hire the people, not us. And so we have always, made it a big point to provide diverse candidate slates, but we never really knew how it was going to turn out because they would tell us who they picked. And it was certainly mathematically possible that we would give a very diverse slate of candidates to the newsrooms, and we'd end up with an entirely white core. Like, it could have worked out that way. And so the good news is it hasn't. Like what we found is we've given, very highly qualified slates that include diverse candidates. And the newsrooms more often than not choose the diverse candidates we're kind of hoping they would choose, so I think that, we weren't doing Report for America 10 years ago, but I suspect that probably wouldn't have happened that way. So I think that to Sandy's point, I think there really is much more of an understanding. It's less of a side initiative of a kind of nice to have. There, in our experience, and we have a weird perch because we have 163 newsroom partners, and we interview more. So we're getting these little teeny windows into newsrooms, and it seems like the sense of urgency that they have about wanting to diversify their newsrooms is real for the most part, and for the right reasons. Like, occasionally you will get absolutely people where it's just like a numbers checking some boxes, we got to do this. But more common than that is that they understand that they can't do a good job covering their communities if they don't have newsrooms that better represent, that look more like their newsrooms. It seems usually genuine. But as I said, there is a real numbers problem, which is most of them are, they're busy laying people off. They don't have jobs. They don't have openings. So right at the moment when really good progress could be being made, it isn't as much as it could be. Now, we just put 95 journalists of color into the field in June. I think that shows there's a real appetite if there's enough money. And I think, honestly, this is where the philanthropic sector has to come in. Like, the traditional commercial models are not going to be creating enough growth to fuel a proper diversification of America's newsrooms.
That's interesting you say this, Stephen, because I on the side of being in the college environment where the recruiters are coming to me, what I'm hearing is exactly this. We don't have any real openings unless you can provide us with a good diversity hire right now. That we will find a position for a good diversity hire, which is great. I mean, it's good. Bad news is not enough opportunity. But also I would love your organization. I know WHYY is involved with us, but I know, Sandy, your internships were canceled, or you may have.
Well, listen, I'm going to do, we just hired 2 Temple grads.
You did?
This week,
Right.
in the last 2 weeks, actually. So, and
okay.
So.
We have a great relationship with you, but, and we have some pipelines to major organizations, but not a strong enough relationship. I mean, I was just looking at our numbers for our school. 40% of our students are diverse in some way. 60% are white and 40% either Asian, African American, Latinx, Pacific Islander, international. Employers are starting to realize they need to come in, but not enough are spending time with us. Come into our classroom, make sure you're posting in our internship and job database, coming to our career fairs, really developing these relationships, because employers who come in and create workshops or writing workshops or, and you all are welcome to, by the way, please reach out to me if you want an intern or you have a full-time position. But I feel only a few organizations have really said, we're here, we're connected with you, and the others are on occasion, it's hit or miss. There's not a dedicated effort to it. And we're going to have to work harder to keep our diverse students in this business, I think. Many are getting discouraged, or they don't have the support, or they feel like they're not going to make enough money, or they can't take an unpaid internship. Those are all real obstacles in bringing more diverse journalists into the business.
What are you hearing in terms of what does it mean to have enough support?
Come in and make yourselves known to us. I
mean, from the point of view of journalists who are out in the field and getting discouraged.
Well, just I have students coming into me and saying, I can't do this. They are from the beginning hearing that they are enemies of the country. I mean, just from the very beginning.
It's a hostile environment.
I don't know if I want to do this. I don't know if I want to be in the middle. We have a whole problem right there with students saying, I'm not sure that I want to go into this field where this has been so politicized. And, when many of us, well, I'll speak for myself, we got in after Watergate and we were the good guys, and and we felt like we were on a mission to do great work and public service for the country. And now these kids are getting very mixed message and not sure this is what they want to get into, and not be paid well in the beginning or maybe for a long time. So that's what I'm facing, and trying to keep great students in and willing to go. And then with internships now being pulled out from under them in this pandemic. So I'm just saying we need more intention from organizations to come in, offer opportunities, give them support, experience, to get them hooked in and go, no, this is what the business really is.
Yeah, I mean, I think we're, and COVID has certainly added on to a disruption, in journalism and in the business side that already was there, right? As is exposed so many things that already were there. But I do think that this is it's a prioritization. I mean, we literally are talking about the sustainability of our business. Whatever kind of journalism on whatever platform there is. And so, I also worry when organizations, if we're talking about real reform in companies, real reform in institutions and in journalism, we have to look at the need for diversity, not as one person coming in and suddenly solving the problem that these institutions have created for the last however many years, right? And we also, sort of things have shifted, like, people create their own content, and there's just a lot of really imaginative journalists out there, and how we, I think, in mainstream newsrooms look at content, how we look at, whose voice matters. I mean, these are all these kind of institutional things, I think, that we have to work through if we're really going to create a space where, we get the best out of people, and also where we create a sustainable model. So I get concerned when and that's maybe the flip side of this moment, right? Where there's an attention, much more interest in diversity. And yet, do people understand? I mean, do newsroom leaders, do boards, do news executives understand why this is not optional and why this is necessary for the sustainability of our business? And I don't think that we kind of ever get to that point. I mean, it becomes about, more staff, as opposed to, what, we have a moment, we have a lot of work to do. And if we don't do it now, then, from the time I started in journalism, I have always heard things about money being an issue or interest being an issue, right? There was the heyday of journalism where there was a lot more money, and frankly, people made decisions not to hire diverse staffs, right? Now that there's, certainly disruptions in what we do, I think it's up to the leadership of organizations to decide where their priorities are. We all know digital, everyone's on digital. So as we're prioritizing positions for digital, we really need to look at diversity in exactly the same way as something that's really critical to the sustainability of what we do.
One of the challenges that we're seeing is that the crisis of local reporting has been met by a crisis in local editing. And so you put people out there, and very often there isn't mentoring. There's definitely not mentoring, but there's not even editing. It's pretty bad in a lot of cases. I remember I had a sort of shocking, eye-opening experience a couple of years ago when one of our early reporters just called us up, sort of sheepishly saying, she was happy, but she said, "Is it weird that I write these articles and they just print them or publish them without anyone looking at them?" And yeah, that's weird. That's not the way it's supposed to work. But then once we became attuned to it, we started to realize that's way more common than you'd think. And we actually started to include this in our selection process, where we started to ask the newsrooms about their editing process. And we started to hear phrases like, "We believe in peer editing," or "We believe in post-publication editing." which to me is like correcting errors that you've been told about, not
Mhm.
actually editing. So this is a real issue too, which is that even as we're making, even when we make progress in getting great people in the field, what kind of experience are they having and how much are they going to grow? And that relates to both just skills,
Mhm.
right? And then also these issues. Sandy's right. You end up with these. This is something we're very conscious of, this with the journalists of color in our program. About 43% of our reporters are journalists of color, and oftentimes they're being asked to do something that's pretty unrealistic, which is they're going into a newsroom, and the good news is that that newsroom has, like, you know, gotten some religion that they need to diversify. The bad news is they're putting way too much burden on this reporter to solve all of their problems of lack of representation,
Mhm.
or all these communities that have been covered horribly for 75 years, and you're putting this reporter in there and expecting that reporter to regain the trust of that community, whatever. It's just like, it's too much to ask and put on, one person's shoulders. Though, I gotta say, a lot of the reporters kind of are into it, they like the challenge of it, and it's still better than them not trying. It's still better than the door being shut and that the beat's not being filled at all. So, I'd rather have this problem than the previous problem, but there's several fronts that we got to fight here. There's a lot of different, challenges to kind of making this work and be, permanent and evolving. Have you found that? This sort of editing problem, have you heard about that in your
Oh, yeah.
travels?
I think that's real. It's not just difficult in terms of, finding editors, but it's also editors with the right mindset, right? Because I think that, we can look at skill sets in so many different ways. Certainly, can you edit? Can you work well with your reporters? All these other kinds of things. But I think the other thing that is demanded is people who understand their communities. People who can really take the experience of journalists of color, and somebody says this is a story and here's why, and not shut it down, right? So I think there's a whole different kind of orientation in our trainings that we ought to be having. But yeah, there's a dearth of editing problem in public media as well.
Stephen, I do hear you. I have employers just coming in going, okay, we get our diversity hire, and almost like, and that should solve our problem. You know what I mean? Like, without not understanding the other. Yeah,
Well,
that's not.
Go ahead.
Is that what you're talking about? Oh, we made our diversity higher. We're done. Right.
Or even I would say it's usually more well-meaning than that. It's more,
yes,
it's that they don't know what, they don't quite have a sense that they're asking, have unreasonable expectations of the reporter, but also just that it doesn't work that way. You can't just do that. In fact, Alison Bethel McKenzie, who's our director of Core Excellence, had a great insight the other day, which was we had all these trainings for the core members about, like, and for journalists of color, like, if you're, the only journalist of color in a newsroom, what's that like? How do you handle that? And she said, what we should really do is be having these trainings for the newsrooms, not just the reporters, because, they need to change as well. And I don't mean to sound like on a high horse or like we're any better than anyone else. We've just learned through experience and hearing the feedback from the reporters that this is an issue.
Well, we've been doing trainings with our whole company, because it's not enough for just a newsroom to move, right? I mean, this has to be something, again, where our board has to be really immersed in this work. I mean, they're the ones ultimately who would hold the CEO accountable, and the CEO has to be involved in this. So, you know, we've opened up our trainings. We do have some newsroom specific trainings and have been doing them regularly for the last 3-4 years. But we've also engaged the rest of the company, the marketing department. So a lot of us have style committees, for example, right? And we've been looking at all these terms of, you know, policing and other things that just become, you know, police involved shootings. What does that mean, right? So we've been looking at all these terms, and now we've opened the style committee up to the marketing department and to, you know, the underwriting department and to the, you know, high-end donor. I mean, we want a representation from our company, because whatever language we decide is important for our company to use, that also expresses a values that we have. It should not just be used by the newsroom, right? So I think that actually has been, and I know for journalists, that's always like, oh my God, we got the firewall, we can't talk to marketing and all these other things, right? I mean, those days are over, and we understand where the lines are that you don't want to cross. But language matters, and what we project to the public matters, and that goes through the entire organization.
Hey, I wonder if we can, I see Sabrina in the chat has asked about the increasing reliance on freelancers by news organization. Is that limiting diversity? And I know on our end, it definitely is concerning to our students who are like, how am I going to support myself if I go into this? I know we're having a freelancing workshop on Tuesday to teach our students how to set themselves up to freelance, but not everyone can afford to do that. Are you all depending on more freelancers? Are you seeing more freelancers?
We do. I mean, I think when we, however, on the flip side, look, I think only some people can make a living from freelancing, so that's a little difficult. But, you know, you were talking, Luann, about creating intention. You know, we instituted paid internships, paid, right? Which now has been stressed by coronavirus. And so that's on pause. However, that is the conversation. Like, if there's something to bring back, that's one thing we'd want. And then the next piece of that, if we don't have an opening, is freelancing. And you know, we've hired, I can't say how many people we've hired because of the freelance pool. We try not to keep them in forever in a freelance pool, right? It's kind of like, you know, we make sure everybody knows who that freelancer is, who, you know, we need to hire at some point. But yeah, it's a tough place to make a living. We don't pay nearly enough for freelance work, but it is an opportunity to continue to build a portfolio.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. I mean, we'll encourage our students to do it to get the experience, hoping it leads to something full time.
Yeah.
But
yeah, that's sort of the problem, is like, you really can't make my wife made a living as a freelance writer for 10 years of her life, but then the economics started to change and freelance rates started going down, down, down. It's really very hard to make a living as a freelance writer. Now, even that might be okay if there was a ladder. Like, okay, you do freelance for a while and you get, as you said, Luann, you get the experience and the clips, and it's fun and you can be creative, but it's not a step on the career ladder because there aren't enough opportunities on the next rung of the ladder.
I'm curious, are you finding that college students that you are hiring have the skills that you're looking for? Are they ready?
That's a good question. I'm curious what's anything. I think, you know, what we're finding is that the sweet spot for our program has tended to be people who are around 26 or 27 years old. So we don't actually mostly hire people right out of college. And that is primarily because we don't view ourselves primarily as a training program. We view ourselves as a service program, and our constituent is the community more than it is the reporter. It's like we're trying to improve information in the community. So we have to be able to make a good faith promise to the newsrooms that we're going to do that. We can give them someone who can hit the ground running. So I would say, mostly not. Mostly, most of the ones that are right out of college probably don't have quite the skills to, hit the ground running. But there's still a tremendous, we have not found, despite everything we've talked about, despite all the problems and challenges, and we're making this sound very gloomy and like, why would anyone on earth want to go into journalism? We've got no shortage of people who not only want to go into journalism, but want to do it as a career. Like they're not using Report for America to figure out whether they want to be journalists. They really want to be journalists. And they've totally embraced the notion of local reporting as a public service. Mm-hmm. They're not in it for the money. They just want to be able to earn a basic living at this and do good work. And that remains to be seen whether we as a society will be able to even clear that bar. But it's, in that sense, it's very encouraging that despite all the problems that we've talked about, there's no shortage still, I think, of very talented people who want to become journalists.
Yeah, I agree. I think, even for those who may not come in with a full set of skills, they're fast learners. I think there's a lot of fast learners. And actually, usually when I try to do just sort of introductory meetings. And that's one thing I do want the group to know too, is that whether there's openings or not, one of the things I really love to do is just to, spend some time talking to someone, whether they're still in school. Oftentimes, we're tracking people when they're still in college, right? And we don't actually spend a lot of time talking about journalistic skill as much as, kind of their sort of mindset about covering communities and what they think their value is. What do they want to get out of journalism in general? I am truly looking for people who like to talk to people. And I mean, look, amid COVID, this is interesting because things have, we can't not do that, right? If ever there's a time you really need to find a way to talk to people, it's now. I like people who come in with some level of cultural competence, right? Who can express, this is what this moment made me think about in terms of, how I could have impact. You can really sense people who see people and kind of can figure out ways to unlayer complicated stories. I mean, just from a conversation. And so, that's one thing that, if there's young journalists, in this group, I try to do, talks at Temple University and other places. And it's really for that. It's that orientation to things like, who are our sources, whose voices do we amplify every single day, right? So the whole diversity picture is much more than a person, but it's really a mindset. It's an understanding. And most of us who came up through journalism, at least, we didn't have those conversations necessarily in our classes, right? It was a lot about how do you be a reporter? How do you structure a story? How do you edit audio? It was all those kind of mechanics of things. But what I'm looking for, particularly in a public media space, gives us a lot of stretch in terms of how we can really connect with communities. I'm looking for that person who really gets into just like, I have to talk to this person, everyone's running in that direction, but I actually want to run in that direction because that person has sat there and I know they have something to say. So there's a mindset and an orientation that I like to see in young journalists. Very few, I think, come in talking about audience, right? Or an audience and community are two different things sometimes. So that orientation, I think, really, really matters. And those are the ones who set themselves apart from journalists who say, I like long form journalists. I want to do a podcast. Like, we can talk in story forms all day long, but that other piece of it is the thing that actually sets people apart.
I'm wondering how many students, if we have some students in this audience, and we're working on their professional development skills all the time. Sandy, I know you were talking about this I mean, so it really sounds like you want people who are diggers, who tell great stories above all else. Anything else you feel like we should be doing to prepare on our level?
Yeah.
What else we can be doing?
Well, however it is that we can impart that this is important work. I think, I was, when I came to HYY 4 years ago, I was at a crossroads where I almost left journalism, right, because of just, to be honest, my last years, I was at the Inquirer and then came to HYY and, had great grounding, but this is a tough business. However, everyone who's left the business cannot replicate it in any way once they've left, right? And many, unfortunately, have been forced out just at the height of their skill set, but this is a unique thing that we get to do. So I have a friend who's a nurse, and I said to her the other day, I said, God, I wish I was a doctor or a nurse, because I really want to do something to help, while this pandemic is happening. And she said, oh my God, you journalists, you're the ones that, we're really appreciating, because you're doing really important work. So I think it's important for, an understanding of the value of this work and why it's important. But most of the public has never met a journalist. And so there's no reason why anyone should just know that on their own, that what's the importance of journalism and why it matters. Yeah.
Right. And that's part of why we have to just get more journalists on the ground.
Yeah.
One, just if you don't mind, quick commercial, December 3rd, we're opening the application for reporters to be in Report for America for the next class, December 3rd. And by the way, there's going to be a kind of pilot program for late career journalists, mid to late career journalists, that we're adding this cycle to try to deal with what you're talking about, sort of brain drain of incredibly skilled journalists who have a lot to both contribute as reporters and as mentors.
That's really incredible. Yeah, we technically were blessed that we have a couple Report for America fellows, Dante Kirby in Baltimore and Michael Butler in Philadelphia. It's an incredible program. So those of you who are in your career, look at Report for America. Luann, thanks for your great work in developing next generation of talent, and Sandy for being among the real stewards of great local journalism. All right, we throw you into the final breakouts of the day, including Stephen, Luann, and Sandy, if they'll